That's how I still feel after what I witnessed last night at Kansas. Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Kansas Speedway. It's fast, it's thrilling, and it sure as hell is entertaining. And yesterday was no different. Despite a 3-hour rain delay that pushed the start back to about 3 hours after the scheduled time, the fans got their money's worth with amazing racing and quite possibly finish of the year. Let's get into all that went down at Kansas yesterday. Number 1, Larson at the line. I mean, unbelievable. Kyle Larson picks up his second win of the 2024 season, winning yesterday's Advent Health 400 at Kansas Speedway by that much over Chris Buescher. 1/1000th of a second was the difference, with Larson winning the race ahead of Chris Buescher, followed by Chase Elliott, Martin Truex Jr., and Denny Hamlin in the top 5. I mean, come on, look at that finish! Literally, just by inches, Kyle Larson gets that win. And yesterday, he had one of the best cars in the race yesterday. It was the best running Chevrolet for a lot of the race. He had some great battles in stage 1 for the lead between guys like Denny Hamlin and Ross Chastain, who he and many other drivers have clarified as the now toughest driver to pass on the racetrack. But they had some thrilling battles for 20 laps in stage 1. He was able to take the lead, and then he fell back once the 11 car of Denny Hamlin came alive. Thus, Hamlin stole the stage win from Kyle Larson, but Larson still was able to maintain his track position inside the top 5 for a lot of the race yesterday. He definitely had one of the best cars. Then in the middle of stage 2, he had a pit stop where everybody was making their green flag stop. Larson in the left front had a little bit of a tough time getting the tire on, so he lost not only the lead, but he lost his track position at the time, but he was able to gain it all back by getting inside the top 5. That's how good of a race car he had. And then stage 3 had to survive all the chaos at the beginning of that last stage with caution after caution after caution after caution. And then many other drivers had to come down pit road because they were kind of at the point where they needed to come in and get their tires and fuel to make it the rest of the way should we stay green the rest of the race. And they had to pass a couple drivers to get up there to inside the top 5 because there were some other guys out there that were stayed out after pitting previously, gambling on trying to make it all the way by saving as much fuel as possible. Larson seemed to fade towards the end of that stage, and it looked like it was basically going to be a top 5 night for him in 5th place. But things changed with 7 laps to go when Kyle Busch spun on the bottom of turns 1 and 2, thus bringing out the caution and bringing everybody down pit road. Larson was one of the 9 cars that elected to take 2 tires on that last pit stop, and he was able to restart 3rd on the inside lane on the restart. And then after they took the green flag, Larson made a 3-wide pass to the inside of Denny Hamlin and Chris Buescher in turn 1, was able to clear Hamlin, but had to go run after Chris Buescher in the 17 car to try to take the win. He kept getting every run he possibly could, and then down the back stretch on the last lap, he got a massive run and carried the momentum into turn 3 by shooting straight to the high side. Buescher tried to cover him, but they were so side by side and almost up against the wall. I thought both of them were going to crash, but they both were able to hold it together, and they kept their foot on the gas pedal as they came off of turn 4. They did touch each other twice, coming down the front straightaway toward the start-finish line. And at the line, I couldn't tell at the moment who won the race because it was so tough and so close. It looked like from the high-speed angle that Buescher got it, but then as Buescher was slowing down on the back straightaway after the race had concluded, they showed Cliff Daniels' face with meaning he's like, hold on, we may have won this race. Now, at the time, NASCAR told him on the radio, the 5 car is the winner, but the TV and the broadcast, we didn't know who won the race until they showed the slow motion coming to the checkered flag. And it was indeed Kyle Larson by 1/1000th of a second over Chris Buescher. And it is now the closest margin of victory in NASCAR history, thus beating Ricky Craven and Kurt Busch's finish at Darlington in 2003 that has stood for 21 years. Yes, we had the 2011 Talladega finish where Jimmy Johnson beat Clint Bowyer by 2/1000ths of a second, which is equaled the closest finish with Craven and Kurt Busch, but that got surpassed yesterday by Larson beating Chris Buescher by 1/1000th of a second. I mean, earlier this year we had an amazing race and a thrilling finish at Atlanta where we had Daniel Suarez beating Ryan Blaney by 3/1000ths of a second and beating Kyle Busch by 7/1000ths of a second. Yesterday's race pretty much took it all away. I mean, it was an amazing finish. And to see Kyle Larson, who's been very good in these last couple of races, competing up front for race wins, thought he had the car to do it last week at Dover, but with being aero blotched late in the race by Denny Hamlin, he couldn't seem to get by him. Yesterday, he was able to make up for it and get his second win of the season. And what is a very good start to Kyle Larson in the month of May. And it's a very busy month for him because not only has he had to run yesterday's race, but he's got the Darlington race. He's got to do Indy 500 qualifying and practice sessions because he's going to run the Indy 500 or attempt to make it. He's got the All-Star race to run, and of course, he's got the Indy 500 should he make the field, which I think he will, and the Coca-Cola 600 trying to do the double on the same day. He has got a busy schedule ahead of him. But this win is a nice start to the month of May for Kyle Larson, the 5 team. And the more wins that he keeps piling on, the stronger he gets before we get to these playoffs. So great job by Kyle Larson, the 5 team, on that impressive win and that thrilling finish yesterday. Number 2, from the thrill of victory to the agony of defeat for Chris Buescher. Oh, so close. I mean, he gave it everything he had yesterday to try to win that race, but just couldn't come through at the end. But massive props to Chris Buescher and the 17 team. They were by far the best of the Ford camp yesterday. They were the fastest car. They started in 12th, got themselves in the top 10, and hung around the top 5 for a lot of the race yesterday. At one point in the race, he made a 5-wide pass right down the middle on the front straightaway where I'm like, that should be a 5-car wreck right there. But they all held it together. Buescher shot through the middle and was able to take second place from those guys that he was racing around at that time for second place. He just had a very good race car yesterday. Like Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin, his car was good on the long runs. And it showcased that in stage 2 where he was able to keep up with Larson and then get the eventual lead from Larson when Larson had that slow pit stop. And Buescher went on to win his first stage of the season. Then, of course, we had all the chaos with those cautions and restarts at the beginning of the final stage. But he was able to get back his track position. Well, here's the thing also. I forgot to mention that Buescher, at the end of stage number 2, before we started the last stage, he had a pit penalty because the crew member went over the wall too soon. And oh, by the way, I'm not sure what that windshield tear was at the back windshield of his car, but that was something I was a little worried about and how it handled aerodynamically. But that windshield tear blew off. But he was able to get back his track position after we had all those cautions and restarts, and everybody else ahead of him had to eventually come in and make their final pit stops of the race, supposedly. But Buescher was able to get his track position back and ran really hard with Denny Hamlin towards the end of the race. It looked like they were going to be battling for the win. But then it looked like Buescher at the end of the race was backing off because he had to save as much fuel as he possibly could because he was a couple laps ahead of everybody else that pitted after them. And it looked like Buescher was going to be borderline of not being able to make it to the checkered flag. But when the caution came out, everybody, like Buescher, everybody came down pit road. He was one of the many cars that put on those 2 tires, and he got a great restart in overtime, getting a nice shove from behind from Chase Elliott, and that was able to carry the momentum into turn 1 to add as well Kyle Larson making the 3-wide pass to the inside of Denny Hamlin, allowed Buescher to get the lead into turn 1 and hold it for the final lap until they got all the way to turn 3 on the last lap when Larson got that massive run. I mean, Buescher was trying everything he could to hold the 5-car back, but the 5-car just had too big of a run on the outside in turn 4, and then they started door slamming each other and start finish line, of course, the finish. Again, I thought Buescher had the win at the line because if they showed it full speed, it kind of looked like he was the man in front. But then showed slow-mo, it was in fact Kyle Larson, the one that got the victory and not Chris Buescher. I mean, for one moment, Scott Graves, the crew chief, and the Castrol Edge Ford team were jumping up and down and celebrating. They're like, we finally got Ford to victory lane this year. We finally got a Ford win. And then they saw the replay and they're like, no, we did not get the win. And he was pretty sad about the not being able to get the win. He didn't cry. I mean, he was just upset that he couldn't pull through and get the win yesterday. Again, it would have been the first win for Ford this year in any of the series because Ford has not won a race in Cup, Xfinity, or Trucks this season. They have been close a few times, but they haven't been able to pull through when it mattered the most. I mean, a couple weeks ago, Brian Keselowski was one of the best chances for Ford to get to victory lane. And this week, it was Chris Buescher who was the best running Ford again all race long. it definitely sucks to see him fall short, but you cannot deny the impressive race that Chris Buescher and the 17 team had yesterday. And I do get the feeling that they are going to get a victory at some point this season. And when he gets a win, he'll start getting a few more, because we saw what happened to him last year. When he got a win, he started winning more races and he didn't stop. I mean, he was really good at the end of last year when he finally was able to get to victory lane and be the dark horse of the playoffs. But it was a nice positive sign to see him running up there with some of the top teams that we expected to see all day long up at the front of Kansas. Gibbs and Hendrick, we saw a lot of their cars up there. But Chris Buescher was the one that spoiled the party up there, racing with those guys, mixing and mingling. He did just such a great job yesterday. I know Buescher fans are frustrated and a little upset, but they got to be pretty proud of the effort that he put together yesterday on the racetrack. I mean, he did a great job, and that win's coming eventually. Mark my words. So, close but no cigar for Chris Buescher, but a great run nonetheless. Number 3, Hamlin strong all day, but restarts in pit road were not his friend. Denny Hamlin, of course, at Kansas, very strong race car. He's the defending winner of this race, and he won last weekend's race at Dover. He came in as the favorite, as expected. He qualified in the top 15, but he quickly worked his way up to the front of the field when we had a long run. That car on the long runs was a rocket ship. And, of course, he was able to take the stage win, stage 1 from Kyle Larson. But when everybody made their pit stops at the end of stage 1 before we got started with stage number 2, Denny Hamlin was just completing his stop, and as he was leaving, he had to arc it out a little bit further, turning harder to the right to avoid Austin Hill, who was pitted right in front of him at the time. He was still in the lead lap, and he came in at an angle that didn't suit the 11 car, so he had to turn a little bit harder to the right to get out of his box, and he lost a lot of spots in the process. And on restarts, Denny Hamlin was literally like a rock sinking to the bottom of the ocean. He would go backwards for quite a few laps before we started to get into a little bit of a long run. He would get some momentum back, and the car would come to him, especially on those long green runs, and he was able to pass guys. At the end of stage number 2, he was closing down on Chris Buescher, but couldn't get the stage win. Actually, I think he was at the end of the top 5 at the end of stage 2. But he still had one of the fast cars. And then we get ready to kick off the final stage. Everybody's making their stops. Hamlin completes his stop, finally gets off pit road in one piece. But just as he's trying to cycle up with everybody leaving pit road, the 41 of Ryan Preece has to slow down because he's trying to get into his box, so Hamlin has to check up. And he fell outside the top 10. And when he got pinned back in that traffic, I thought there's no way Denny Hamlin could get back up to the front. The further he goes backwards, the harder it's going to be for him to get back up there, even though his car would be good on long runs. You don't know how far back he could get to prevent him from getting back up there to have a chance to win. But of course, all the cautions and all the restarts happened. Hamlin and a few others were able to pit during one of those cautions, come in and get their tires and fuel, and then they were able to cycle back out in front of everybody else after the caution for Joey Logano spinning. And Hamlin had the lead, and it looked like he was going to be on his way to winning. Probably, but maybe not, because his teammate Martin Truex Jr. was catching him towards the end of that race. And then the Kyle Busch spin happened. Everybody came down pit road. Hamlin was able to have a clean stop and get out pit road first with 2 tires. But my fear was, how would he be on the restart, because they were not his bread and butter yesterday. And when Larson made 3 wide into turn number 1, I knew right then and there Denny Hamlin wasn't winning the race. And he ended up slipping back behind Elliott and Truex and ended up with a 5th place finish. Still a good result for the 11 team off of the impressive win last weekend, and being the defending winner of this race, he had one of the best cars. But once again, sometimes leaving pit road yesterday with other cars coming into their box, and those restarts kind of killed him yesterday. But a great job by the 11 team yesterday. Number 4, solid runs for a lot of our top contenders yesterday. Elliott got a 3rd place finish, Truex with a 4th place finish, Christopher Bell with a 6th place finish, Alex Bowman with a 7th place finish, Kyle Busch with an 8th place finish after he was the caution at the end of the race, and Noah Gragson continues to be really, really strong. Kicking off with Elliott finishing in 3rd place, he was never really in the top 5 yesterday. He ran around 9th to 15th for most of the race. I mean, they had a nice car, but they didn't have a winning contending car like Larson, Buescher, or Hamlin did. But Elliott was one of the cars that came in and got those 2 tires at the end of the race to set up overtime. He was able to get Buescher the push he needed to get up in front of Hamlin on that restart. Elliott was able to mix and mingle with those guys, and off of 4, he and Martin Truex Jr. had a run in those top 2 that if they somehow tangled, we might have been talking about Elliott and Truex running to the start-finish line for the race win. But at the end of the day, a 3rd place finish, still a really good result for a driver who's been really strong as of late since that win at Texas. Then Martin Truex Jr., he had a good race car in general yesterday. He hovered around 5th to 8th place for a lot of the race. But then the final 30 laps of that race, Martin Truex Jr. was gaining on those guys up front. He got by Larson, he got by Buescher because he knew he had enough fuel and a fair amount of tires left in him to get that 11 car. And he was going to pass Denny Hamlin with about 5 laps to go with the amount of fuel that Hamlin was trying to save. Truex knew he had enough fuel to get to the end of the race. It looked like Truex was going to be in the catbird seat to win until the caution came out. He was the first car to come off pit road with 4 tires. The problem was he restarted in 10th place, so he kind of had his work cut out for him, but he was still able to pick his way through those guys on the overtime restart and come out with a 4th place finish. I know it's not the win, but still a nice result for Martin Truex Jr. Then his teammate Christopher Bell started on the pole for yesterday's race and finally stopped the bleeding of the last 4 weeks because they've been hell for Bell. He has not run well. I mean, he had the wheel issues in the spin at Martinsville. He backed into the wall at Texas even though he finished in the top 20. He got wrecked on the backstretch in the last stage at Talladega. And last week, after starting at the rear because he crashed his car in qualifying, he found himself in the top 15, but was part of that wreck on the backstretch with Bubba Wallace and William Byron. But yesterday, they were able to put together a nice, clean race. They weren't really good on the long runs. They were particularly good on the short runs, but it's still a top 10 to stop the bleeding of the last 4 weeks. Got to feel good if you're Christopher Bell in that 20 team. Then Alex Bowman finished 7th place. Was perhaps the second best Hendrick car yesterday. Just consistently ran in the top 10. Fell out of the top 10 towards the end of the race, but like many teams, they were the ones that took 2 tires at the end, and that got him a top 10 finish. So good job by the 48 team. And then I talked about Kyle Busch. He brought out the caution early on the race. Kyle Busch was a really good race car too. Ran up front, led a good amount of laps. Good positive stuff from the 8 team as of late. They've been running better, and they've been getting good pit stops as well. And to overcome that spin, so he restarted 23rd in overtime last night, and he came home with an 8th place finish. Obviously, 4 tires matters, but goes to show you that an angry Kyle Busch to drive up through the field and get a top 10 is a determined race car driver. And then Noah Gragson, I mean, what a run he is on right now. 3 top 10s in a row. The top 5 at Talladega, the 6th place last weekend at Dover, and a 9th place finish last night. Really good job. He qualified 3rd, and he was the best running car of the Stewart-Haas organization yesterday, because yesterday, aside from Josh Berry being able to get a top 15 in the race, the other 3 drivers vanished to the point where I couldn't even find them on a milk carton on a shelf at a grocery store. That's how bad the Stewart-Haas cars were yesterday, aside from Noah Gragson. He was the best running car, ran in the top 10 a lot of that race, fell outside of it for a little bit, but he was able to get those 4 tires at the end of the race. Or actually, no, he took 2 tires as well, but he still got a top 10 finish. He has now equaled the amount of top 10s the 10 team had all last year. They didn't get their 5th top 10 of the season until Martinsville last year, finishing runner-up to Ryan Blaney in the fall race with Eric Almirola driving. Now they've equaled that with 5 top 10s from Noah Gragson, and he's now 19th or 18th in the point standings. He has really come alive. I don't think it's there's a strong possibility Noah Gragson could make these playoffs. Either maybe he wins or he points his way in. But whatever that 10 team is doing, him and Drew Blickensderfer, they have got it nailed down right now, and I couldn't be impressed, those guys. And also, shout out to Michael McDowell finishing in 10th place. He was one of the cautions early on in Stage 3 when Austin Cindric got squeezed in the wall by Christopher Bell and Hamlin off of Turn 2. Cindric hit the wall and ricocheted back into traffic, collected Bubba Wallace and Michael McDowell. And I thought Bubba and Michael's race would be ruined. Obviously, Cindric's was already done. But Bubba and McDowell still continued, but McDowell was able to get out of there with a nice top 10 finish. So good job by the 34 team, and stops the bleeding of the last couple weeks for them because they've not really had a lot of luck either. But great runs by a lot of those drivers yesterday. And number 5, the race itself. Oh my goodness. That was race of the year yesterday. This racetrack, Kansas Speedway, and this next-gen car go together like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. The racing all day yesterday. We had to wait 3 hours for the rain to go away and let them race. Because remember, we've got lights at this track. And the drivers yesterday put on an amazing show for the fans. Great battles all day long. As I mentioned, the 5-wide shot we had on the front stretch at the beginning of Stage 2 was insane. All the side-by-side action. We had a lot of comers and goers. Of course, you had your normal dominant race cars, but you had other guys surface up to the top 5, top 10 at points during the race. So many battles down here. You could pass with this car. Bottom, middle, high groove, whatever lane you wanted to run. This racetrack is a driver's racetrack because it runs like a typical, asphalt mile-and-a-half track at times, but sometimes running up against that wall, if you're a dirt racer like Larson, Reddick, Bell, you use it to your advantage. And these guys just put on a great race yesterday from start to finish. Even the long runs, when we had the green flag pit stops, there were guys still being able to be bunched together after those stops, battling for position, like, of course, the Chastain-Larson battle for the lead in the early part of stage 1, and then Denny Hamlin coming up there, and then Chris Buescher arriving, a lot of other guys up there racing for the lead. It was absolutely insane and so much fun to watch yesterday. This is a track I've got to make it out to at some point in my lifetime. This track is so much fun to watch on television. I can't imagine what it's like in person. All the fans yesterday watching in person got their money's worth with that amazing race and that insane, thrilling finish at the end of the day. Well worth the wait, wasn't it, folks? I just really love Kansas Speedway. I mean, this is the best mile-and-a-half track we have on the schedule. Listen, no disrespect to the other tracks. Charlotte Motor Speedway with the Coke 600 in this car have had some really good races. Las Vegas has also had some decent races. And we all know what Homestead has meant to NASCAR, especially with it being the championship race for many, many years. In Texas, the last couple of years of this car, it's gotten better. It's been polarizing at times, but then there have been times where they've had some good races like the one we had a few weeks ago. But Kansas Speedway is the best track that we go to with this next-gen car to put on amazing racing on a mile-and-a-half track. I really enjoyed it from start to finish yesterday, from the green flag all the way to the checker flag. Kansas Speedway, you delivered once again. Now, it is time for some throwback weekend racing. Next weekend, we are off to the Lady in Black, the track too tough to tame, Darlington Raceway, a track where these drivers are going to be having their hands full and trying to stay off the wall and prevent themselves from getting a Darlington stripe. And next weekend, we honor NASCAR's past. We're going to be honoring the regional series of racing. Of course, there'll be a couple of paint schemes from the Cup Series days back then in the 2000s, 90s, 80s, 70s, even the 2010s for a few teams. But I'm very excited to see these guys have their hands full next weekend on an old abrasive track, but it's very fun to drive on. And it's also special because we'll be running on Mother's Day next weekend. So to all the fans out there, I hope you go and do something for your mom. Get her a card, get her a gift, take her out to lunch or dinner or anything. And also call and text them and tell them that you love them. But I'm very excited for some racing next weekend at the track too tough to tame. So will Larson be back-to-back winners yesterday's race, and next weekend will Martin Truex Jr., who's been very good at Darlington in the past, get his first win of the season? Can Buescher make up for the one that got away from him yesterday? Or will somebody else get aggressive and get to victory lane, like a Ross Chastain or a Brad Keselowski? We shall see, but I'm sure Darlington is going to put on a show for us next weekend. So I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I hope you all enjoyed that entertaining race yesterday. So subscribe, like, congrats once again to Kyle Larson and the 5 team on their impressive win and a thrilling finish yesterday. Have a great week, everybody. Let's go racing!